Hey, welcome to the Rain and Morale podcast. So do you ever feel like screaming out in the office, on Zoom or outside the school gates, for the love of God, come on, really? Then if this is you and you're looking for an honest, fun and frank podcast on life and business, then sit back and listen to me, Rain and Morale. I'll be bringing great people on the show to talk, share and debate their life experiences and business challenges, keeping the show unpolished, but in a fun and unique British style, with sarcasm, tenacity, maybe a few swear words or tears. This podcast keeps it real, honest, raw, and removes the bullshit in the only way I know how, through authenticity and getting shit done. Think of it less like the Housewives of New York or Towie with the lipo and drama, and more like the house lives of the real world. I hope you'll take something away to be better informed, laugh, smile, or maybe even finally getting the confidence to shout, come on, really. So enjoy. Gail, welcome to the Rain and Morale podcast. How are you?
Hi, Rona. Thank you so much. Lovely to meet you. And thank you for inviting us to join your podcast today.
Oh, you're very welcome. So for everybody listening, I'm delighted to have Gail with me here today. He's from Tobacco-Free Portfolios. And you might think, well, that's a bit strange. What's all that about? Well, recently I've been kind of posting and talking about what actions we can take as everyday individuals. And I was really profoundly impacted by what the Tobacco-Free Portfolios was doing, and we'll come on to talk about that. But to introduce Gail, joined the organisation in February this year, but before that, for 10 years, worked with the UN National Development Programme, developing mostly into obviously the finance sector. You hold a number of board and advisory roles for non-profits, which is fantastic. And I know that you led a team for the kind of tobacco, what if I translate it into Rona terms, the people at the end who are actually making the cigarettes, what impact it has on deforestation, their lifestyles, their communities, and actually showing them a way that they could shift change from producing tobacco products to alternatives. I know you're super passionate as well about all things international development and environmental conservation in oceans as well, specifically oceans. And of course, you've written a plethora of amazing articles and journals around this whole topic. So welcome and thank you again for joining me.
Well, thank you, Rona, for a very generous introduction.
Well, for those listening, I haven't even touched on half of what Gail has done, but that just gives you a flavour of Gail's background and what she's done. So what I'd love to start with, Gail, is just talking two main topics, really. Obviously, one about tobacco-free portfolios, who you are, where you came about and what you do. And then secondly, we'll kind of go on to the lesser known impacts, not health impacts of smoking and COP26. So please tell us a bit more about your organisation and what goes on.
Oh, well, thanks, Rona. So Tobacco-Free Portfolios, who are we and what do we do? So we are a small non-profit organisation that works collaboratively with the financial sector. So with banks, with asset management firms, with pension providers, with insurance companies, and we encourage them to reevaluate their commercial relationships with tobacco companies. So we ask them not to lend to or insure tobacco companies. And why do we do that? Well, there are many reasons which we can come on to in just a moment. I mean, I think one of the most striking statistics is that tobacco is on track to kill 1 billion people this century. That's over 8 million people annually die from the consumption of tobacco or from exposure to tobacco smoke, which is a really shocking statistic and far higher than those, unfortunately, that have died from COVID. We were founded just over 10 years ago by a radiation oncologist in Australia, Dr. Bronwyn King, when she found out as a radiation oncologist that her pension was being invested in tobacco companies. She was utterly horrified and went forth on a mission to ensure that the finance sector was part of the solution, rather than part of the problem. And my own interest in tobacco really comes from my previous work with the United Nations. You mentioned, Rona, my work beforehand. So while I was working with the UN, one of my projects was to lead a small team working with smallholder tobacco farmers in Zambia to help them to transition to alternative farm and non-farm livelihoods, much better, more sustainable livelihoods. And I can tell you from my own experience that tobacco farming in no way represents a route out of poverty for the families, communities that farm it. And, I also saw with my own eyes how tobacco farming contributes to so much environmental destruction as well. So, for example, tobacco farmers have to go out into the forest to cut down wood in order to build the fires that they need to cure tobacco leaves, to leave the cured. So it's not just, valuable arable land that you're using for a non-food crop in a food secure country. You're actually destroying additional forest to make it. So these were challenges from a development perspective that I was very concerned about, and why I was pleased to join the organization and help them in their mission.
And can I ask you then, what sort of alternatives were you able to offer those local communities, and what did they shift into?
Oh, so a variety. Local people are, they were amazingly focused and knowledgeable about what they wanted to do, and the main constraint was access to finance. Tobacco companies operate a very slick system whereby they promise to buy all of the crop at a low price, and they're able to provide credit and inputs to local farmers in a way that the local financial sector is not able to provide. But we were working with local cooperatives and local financial institutions. Farmers were interested in growing a lot of ground nuts, was very popular. It's a crop that keeps well, and there's growing demand for ground nuts to make into peanut butter and other products, other vegetable crops. Some were interested in moving into dairy farming, some also into fish farming, tilapia in particular. So a variety of different livelihoods.
And were you able to, after a period of transition, show that financially it could just be as secure, consistent, and was able to then sustain the communities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the challenges that many communities face, it's access to credit, but also that the tobacco companies offer to buy all of their crop, but at a low price. So if you can work with local cooperatives to ensure that farmers are able to sell the entirety of their farm crop, their groundnuts or their blueberries or whatever it might be, then yes, they can make a much better living and a more sustainable living.
Fantastic. And I think that's good to hear, because I think often we talk about, let's transition the poorest of people who are all just genuinely trying to make a living. As you say, it's all about the finance to make them more environmental. But then really that's what tobacco-free portfolios is doing, is it's actually addressing the front end and the investment into those sectors, isn't it?
No, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we work collaboratively with financial institutions to raise awareness of the many problems associated with tobacco. So we all know about the public health harms. We all know that tobacco is bad for us, and we know that, it creates many health problems. But we also try to raise awareness of the many other problems associated with tobacco production and consumption. So in countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, others, tobacco farming is associated with child labor and relies on child labor. Right. But also I think financial institutions are increasingly aware of and interested in environmental issues, and some of the environmental concerns around tobacco are less well known. So, for example, tobacco filters are the world's #1 littered item worldwide, and 5.6 trillion cigarette filters are used every year, and 4.5 trillion of those cigarette filters are just thrown away irresponsibly. It's the last sort of acceptable form of litter, if you like. And the vast majority of those end up in our oceans, on our beaches, in our rivers, where they harm wildlife. They're made of plastic, so they don't biodegrade. In Zambia, as I mentioned, countries, and in many other developing countries, tobacco is associated with deforestation, which is a leading cause of climate change. So I think, many financial institutions under pressure now from consumers, from pension plan holders, are being encouraged to take environmental and sustainability considerations more into account. And our job really is to raise awareness of some of the environmental challenges or impacts associated with tobacco. It's not just about public health, it's about so many other things as well. In the UK, for example, it costs local councils £44 million every year to clean up tobacco litter. And so, I think many people are legitimately asking whether that should be a price that local councils pay, taxpayers like all of us have to bear, or whether tobacco companies themselves should assume some of those financial costs on their own balance sheets.
Because it's quite interesting with that comparison. Similarly with litter, actually, the end user is the person creating that, i.e. not putting it in a bin or stubbing it out on the floor or whatever, but actually so much gets put onto the end user of all of these, be it home energy or food waste, whatever. You do wonder whether you could get to that point. Are there any cases where, especially with the environmental impacts, but certainly within your sector, where companies are being held to account and they are having to pay that price? Or is that not happening yet?
Well, I think this was a big issue at COP26, the climate change conference. I'm based in Edinburgh, so I was able to attend some of the events just down the road in Glasgow. And of course, this is a big issue that many companies, like fossil fuel companies, like tobacco companies, internalize all the profits, but externalize all of their damages, whether that's through carbon emissions or through environmental waste of various kinds. And I think many people are increasingly questioning whether that's a fair business model, and whether carbon pricing or other environmental taxes or fees should be imposed on various kinds of companies in order to address some of these environmental harms that all of us pay the price for in the end, whether we smoke or not, or whether. So I think we're increasingly going to see public pressure in some of these areas in the next few years.
So say for someone like me that wants to look at my portfolio and assess, I guess there might be things like, well, if I'm doing a lot in tobacco, not realizing, or fossil fuels, what happens if I move my money out of that into greener alternatives and more sustainable options? Some people are worried, and their gut instinct is it's never going to make any money. So if I'm retiring in the next 10 to 15 years, what's the point? Because that's where the money's being made. How do you approach that? How can you help us?
Well, I think the good news is that we found in our research that you don't need to invest in tobacco to make strong and stable returns, that many of the pension providers that we have worked with, once they have gone tobacco free, they've actually made better returns than with tobacco. So there was one study of US pension plans that had gone tobacco free over a 10-year period versus those which had retained tobacco within their portfolio. And the ones that had gone tobacco-free outperformed those that had retained tobacco. And if you actually look at the share price of tobacco companies over the last 5 years, you'll see that it's actually fallen by around half. So it's not necessarily the sound investment that it used to be. And all of the risks that I've been talking about, like environmental risk, reputational risk, regulatory risk, these are all risks that are intensifying on tobacco companies. Those risks are only going to get bigger and bigger, and so they are also likely to continue to contribute to hopefully to a share price decline. And there are many, many other ways to invest your money, and many providers do offer sustainable alternatives. Do check whether those sustainable alternatives are tobacco free, because sometimes just because a fund is labeled sustainable doesn't automatically mean it's tobacco free, unfortunately. But you can go to our website, tobaccofreeportfolios.org, and you can look at the signatories to our tobacco-free finance pledge. In 2018, we launched the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge, which invites financial companies to sign up to the pledge and encourage others to do so as well and join them on that journey. And you have a list of over 175 financial institutions there that are tobacco free, and we are adding more all the time in our growing community. So
that's amazing. And is it true that within the organisation you've managed to move nearly $1 trillion or pounds out of tobacco and into non-tobacco?
Oh, much more than that, Rona, which is fantastic. So since 2018, when we launched the Tobacco-Free Finance Pledge at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, we have now worked with 175 financial institutions from over 20 countries around the world, representing $12 trillion US dollars in assets.
I was slightly short there.
Yes. So we're trying to get to 20 trillion, of course, but we're on our way. There's more joining all the time. But yes, it's a big achievement, but certainly more work to be done.
And I suppose as individuals as well, with your own pension or whatever, I suppose you could go to your HR department and to your head of business. If I'm just a single entrepreneur, but if you work in an organisation, you could simply ask, couldn't you, say, actually, could you tell us the pensions that you invest in, where are they going? And because you enroll in a pension, don't you? But you never think to ask these questions. You're like, oh, I do 8, they do, they match, and away they go. You don't really investigate.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I would encourage anyone to do that, to please, ask their pension provider what their policies are on tobacco. Encourage them to go tobacco free, ask them whether they have any tobacco free funds. I think what's really important for people to be aware of as well, especially those in the public sector who have public pension plans, is that according to the United Nations Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is a very long word for saying that there is a UN treaty on tobacco control, which commits the signatory countries, and there's over 180 countries worldwide that have signed this UN treaty on tobacco control. It commits them to progressively implementing stronger tobacco control measures over time. But one of the clauses in that UN treaty is that governments and their affiliates should not have financial interests in tobacco companies.
Right.
So not many public pension plans know that. Public sector entities should not have any financial interest in tobacco companies. So trying to raise awareness of that, like local authority pension schemes, can on that basis say, well, look, there's a UN treaty, the UK government has signed up to it, we shouldn't really be investing in tobacco.
So would it be, for people who don't get the benefit of a better private pension, but they're involved in the UK government enrolled pension, the one that's kind of compulsory now. Can everyone out there be safe in the knowledge that none of that is invested in tobacco?
Well, I'm not sure which one you're referring to specifically, but if you look at our website, Nest, the National Employment and Savings Trust in the UK, is one of our signatories and has been tobacco free for a long time. So there's many that are,
Okay.
USS for the universities is tobacco free. So there's many that are, and some that unfortunately aren't there yet, but we're working with them to try and encourage them to set up that journey.
So have you had any sort of negative impacts, some good old British fights with the tobacco companies? How are they dealing with your progressive movement in this space? Are they trying new tactics? Are they just thinking it doesn't matter because, as you said earlier, there's trillions of cigarettes smoked a year?
Yeah, 5.6 trillion cigarettes smoked every year. I mean, we do not engage as an organization with tobacco companies. So we don't have any direct contact with them. And in fact, the United Nations recommends a policy of non-engagement with tobacco companies. In terms of, their strategies and tactics, I mean, some of them will try to portray themselves as strong leaders on the environment or on climate, and some of them do score strongly on ESG, environmental, social, and governance methodologies. We argue that those methodologies are flawed because they should measure what products and services a company makes rather than how well that company is run, and whether, just because a company is putting more women on its boards and is using less plastic in its wrappers, doesn't change, the fundamental end result, which is what products and services is the company making. And in the case of tobacco companies, they make a product that kills people and leads to the premature death of 2 out of every 3 of its customers. We've seen a lot of tobacco companies putting forward the transition argument, so that they are transitioning away from traditional combustible tobacco products towards, vapes. We've seen a huge rise in e-cigarette use, especially amongst young people recently, which is a cause for concern. In the UK, we saw Philip Morris International acquire the pharmaceutical company Vectura recently. I mean, there are a couple of things that we would say in response to sort of the transition argument. And the first is that tobacco companies continue to make the vast majority of their revenues, over 3/4, from traditional combustible tobacco products. And they continue to bid for new factory licenses and build new factories in the developing world for traditional tobacco products. And on e-cigarettes and vapes, we also say that just because the tobacco companies will tell you these products are less harmful, but less harmful does not equal safe. Or
less environmentally damaging.
Correct. So, these products are highly addictive and expose users to all sorts of chemicals. And yes, you're right, Rona, they are still associated with a lot of environmental waste because they're composed of both electronic and plastic components that are very hard to recycle. Not many municipalities, much less in the developing world, would have the facilities in place to recycle those. So, it's we say tobacco companies, continue to resist regulatory changes, and they should be judged by their actions.
Of course. And I think it's such a huge challenge, because I know obviously your organisation is here to drive awareness and divert, investments. But I think, smoking is such a global, in every corner of the earth that even I've ever travelled to, and I've been to some rural, remote places, people smoke. And so has there ever been, it's random, but has there ever been something innovative where people have taken the filters and been able to make a product or service or something out of it, or a secondary, I don't know.
Well, probably not, because most of them just end up in the beach, on the beach and in the waterways. It's the most littered item in the world. But to your first point, I mean, you spoke about smoking being present in every corner of the world. And actually 80% of the world's smokers are now located in low and middle income countries. They're located in developing countries where public health systems have the least capacities to cope.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a huge development challenge as well, and they affect people's health in their prime productive years and mean they can't contribute to the economy of their country. And, you see that in countries like Indonesia, it's overwhelmingly children that are starting to smoke. People start to smoke at a very, very young age, early teens, and they become addictive. So, smoking advertising in the developing world is much more lax. And
yes, I've noticed that.
Yeah, and it's a huge concern for us.
Yeah. You touched earlier on, obviously you guys were at COP. What was your big takeaway from it, and has it helped your cause and your fight to do what you need to do? Were you able to take things to another level?
I think, everyone will pore over the final outcome document from COP26 and have differing views on whether the 1.5 degrees C limit for global warming is within reach. But for our work specifically, I think there were a couple of bright spots.
Right.
The first is that during the first week, there was a major announcement to combat deforestation. So that was an announcement that was signed up to by more than 100 countries worldwide, covering over 85% of the world's forests, with a commitment to end deforestation by 2030. For us, it's not well known that tobacco contributes to deforestation, and deforestation is one of the leading causes of climate change. So having that agreement in place, I think, does provide us with further useful material to pressure financial institutions and governments as well to take action and move away from tobacco.
Are you able to sort of put us, because we think of deforestation and we think of, trees and furniture and agriculture being one of the biggest. Are you able to put a figure on what amount of deforestation is caused by the tobacco industry?
So tobacco is responsible for 5% of deforestation in low and middle income countries specifically. So That was the data, I think, from 2019. Though in individual countries, the figure can be much higher, depending on how much tobacco that particular country is producing. So, for example, in Bangladesh, the figure is much higher.
Right.
The second bright spot, I hope, from COP26 was that there was a global alliance of financial institutions committed to net zero. They made announcements to align their portfolios with net zero by 2050. Again, it's a commitment that has come under a great deal of scrutiny. What's underneath it, what action plans, how will it be measured? But from our point of view, the fact that financial institutions have indicated a public commitment to align their portfolios with net zero, that tobacco does have significant climate and environmental impacts. It's a powerful tool, I hope, for us to again push the case that they should be moving away from tobacco.
No, exactly. And I think, it's certainly enlightened me more, just the amount of deforestation due to tobacco production. And 5 might not sound a lot compared to, the farming and agriculture, but on scale, that's a huge amount of loss. And like you say, in some countries, much, much higher. What would be the biggest win for you guys now if you could, wave that wand or get that institute on board? What would be the thing that would really turn a corner for you?
Well, I think for us, when the big players in the market waved the flag and announced their commitment to go tobacco free, the big systemically important players in the market, that would have a huge signaling impact on others.
Yeah.
So, we do have some big well-known names amongst our list, but there's others that are still laggards. I won't mention any names. Please ask me to, but
I won't.
Some of them are well known to all of us, are still invested in tobacco in various ways. And, we would love them to join us in the journey to tobacco-free finance.
Yeah, I mean, look, it'd be easy for me to ask you the names, but the reality is we're still combined into old school ways of doing business and the way shareholders and profits and return on investment. So what's refreshing for me is that you do already have so many. Some of them might be smaller, up and coming, VCs, family institutions, whatever. But in the long run, the reality is these big boys have got a ticking clock against them, against be it tobacco, fossil fuels, whatever. From your organisation's point of view, and for anyone kind of listening, outside of checking where your investments are going on, pensions, and maybe having a chat with your organisation that you work in, what else could we do as individuals? Obviously, those that smoke don't smoke, but what else could we do?
No, I think if people are already checking with their pension providers, or if they're investing money elsewhere, really being mindful about how they are investing that money, that would already represent a huge shift. A huge positive shift.
Yeah.
If people are genuinely concerned about tobacco and its impact on society and the environment, there are various ways they can be involved. For example, at the moment, there's a UK government consultation open on single-use plastic. It covers tobacco filters. Please,
I didn't realise that.
Yep, it opened this weekend. Please respond and share your views. Tobacco filters are plastic. They serve absolutely no purpose with regard to making the cigarette safer or more enjoyable. They're just a cosmetic thing. So, to share your views, and there are other organizations, non-profit organizations that are engaged in various ways in sort of public health and environmental debates, and that we work with as well.
Yeah, because it really surprises me then that some of the big players who are still investing in that sector probably are sort of going, well, we're working with those that are saying they're more sustainable, etc. But when child labour's involved, that's a really tough. Surely there must be, and again, no names, but surely there must be people out there who are actively investing in child labour to put it simply?
Well, the US Department of Labor publishes data every year, and it reports that child labor is used in tobacco farming in 16 countries worldwide. And you can find that list online very easily. And because of the way tobacco farming works, leaves are sourced from a variety of both small and large-scale producers and then amalgamated together. Virtually no cigarette can be 100% guaranteed to be free from child labor. So it's a huge problem. And, in particular, the UK works with many developing countries like Malawi, where child labor is a huge problem. We provide development assistance to these countries, and it's a pity that our financial institutions are continuing to invest in a product which creates such harms both at the very beginning of its life and at the very end as well.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier around I suppose that the UK government gets a lot of stick, whether Conservative, Labour, whoever is in. The more conversations I have like this, the more you realise, that they're getting involved in lots of different things. But there's part of you that goes, they shouldn't have to be paying £44 million a local government. They shouldn't have to be getting involved in these things because they shouldn't exist. But life is life, and they do exist. So it's hard to. It all feels quite overwhelming, but I think what I love about what you guys are doing is you're so focused. It's like, right, tobacco-free portfolios, move the investments, education, awareness. And I can only imagine in 5-10 years' time where you're going to be. If you had a vision for that, what would that look like?
Oh, no, well, of course, we want 100% of financial institutions to have moved away from tobacco. So, of course, that's where we want to be, and we want to shift that dial as quickly as possible. And, it's aligned with the vision of many governments around the world. Yes, they do get stick for not doing enough, and I can sit here and say that they should be doing more. Many do have visions to be smoke-free by 2030. That includes the UK government and many countries around the world. The key is not to ensure that a new generation doesn't become addicted to such a terrible product. And so, it's really important to work with the full range of, organizations, educators, financial institutions and others to make this vision of a smoke-free UK and world by 2030 a reality. We all have to play.
And so if one of these big players kind of came out, you said earlier about the UN and you guys, you don't necessarily interact with them. At some point, do you think, actually, when we talk collaboration, the hardest collaborations are our absolute opposite, as we would see it, and I'm putting words in my own mouth, enemy, if you like. In what way do you think there could be an agreeable transition or a way to collaborate with them? Or is it just they're going to keep doing what they're doing until they're absolutely forced out of the situation and we're just going to focus on us?
Well, as I said before, the UN recommends a policy of non-engagement with tobacco companies because the UN right to human health is incompatible with tobacco companies and the products that they make. For us, the only acceptable outcome would be for them to immediately cease what they are doing. The reality is that they continue to oppose a raft of legislation which is designed to tighten restrictions around tobacco production and consumption. they continue to derive the vast majority of their products, revenue, through traditional tobacco products. So, under these circumstances, no, a policy of non-engagement is... Oh, no, I've lost you.
Can you hear me again now?
Now I can hear you.
Sorry, I've had a new laptop and it's being a bit naughty. So if we could go back a little bit, I'll edit that bit out, don't worry, this bit out. But if we could just, sorry about that. I probably won't edit it out. This is just real life. But you were sort of talking about, in reality, what they're doing, and the vision would be for them to stop. But
yeah, no, I mean, the UN is very clear that the right to human health is incompatible with what tobacco companies produce. And tobacco companies continue to oppose a raft of legislation which is designed to tighten restrictions around tobacco production and tobacco consumption. And they continue to derive the vast majority of their revenues through traditional tobacco products. They continue to market their products overwhelmingly to youth. I mean, if you look at this transition argument and the whole market around e-cigarettes, they've aggressively targeted young people with those products by putting them in attractive, colorful packaging, by giving them flavors like bubblegum candy. You're not telling me that those are targeted towards consumers in their 30s and 40s and 50s. It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
It's to hook a whole new generation on a highly addictive product. So, of course, there has to be a policy of non-engagement with these kinds of practices in place. In the UK, in Bristol, there was a case recently where samples of e-cigarettes were being given out and young people were not being asked for ID to prove that they were over 18 with these free samples. So, to say that they're supporting users to switch products, from more harmful tobacco, traditional tobacco, towards e-cigarettes is simply not true. They're trying to hook a whole new generation on the new product.
Yeah. Well, listen, fascinated by all of this, and I think what I've learned today, and hopefully the listeners are, there's a couple of things you can do about it that are really, really easy. So just go check out your pensions, also speak to your employers, but also the awareness around the environmental impact. And as you rightly say, everyone just immediately goes to health, but understanding the deforestation, the poverties, the child labour. And I think thank you so much for bringing that to the audience and raising awareness. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I've no doubt Bronwyn and you and the team will do amazing things, and you'll get all of those investments moved.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Rona, for inviting us to share our story. And we'd love others to join us in our work. So please do check out our website, tobaccofreeportfolios.org, and love to hear from you. And thanks again for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you.
So that's it. You've made it. The show's over. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've been able to take something away, maybe solve a problem, or just know you're not alone. Here's hoping it made you smile with a few laughs along the way. Please feel free to find me on all social media channels, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search the Rona Morale Podcast. Have an awesome day and see you next time.